What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and I'm continuing my journey of catching up on a couple of movies that's come out in the last couple of weeks that I missed out on seeing when they initially released, and this is one I was looking forward to checking out. So today we're going to be talking about Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1. Written, directed, and produced by Kevin Costner, this film was also written alongside by Mark Kasdan and John Baird, and also stars Kevin Costner, as well as a slew of other fantastic actors and actresses like Sienna Miller, Sam Worthington, Jenna Malone, Scott Hayes, Jamie Campbell Bower, John Beavers, Tom Payne, and so many more. Man, it's been quite some time since I've seen a Western in theaters. I think the last time I saw one in theaters was Magnificent Seven, and it's a genre that we don't get a whole lot of these days. And when I say Magnificent Seven, I should say the reboot. But yeah, you know, it's one of those genres that we don't get a whole lot of in theaters these days, and I have so many fond memories as a kid of hanging out with my grandfather in his room and watching the various John Wayne or Clint Eastwood or other popular Westerns that he would just have on TV. He used to have a bunch of them also like recorded on old VHS tapes right off of TV. And so when I was younger, I used to intake a lot of Westerns. And as I got into cinema, as I got into film, as I was getting older, sure, sci-fi, fantasy, and a lot of the big action blockbusters are a lot of what pulled my young mind into movies. And I've talked about how that is my favorite genre. But without a doubt, one of the genres I've always had the most respect for is the Western genre. And I'm kind of ashamed that in my 5-6 years of doing this here on YouTube, that I've yet to talk about a lot of Westerns here. I've talked about a couple, but not enough. And watching this movie actually made me want to cover more Westerns here on the channel, as well as go back and revisit one of my favorite video games of all time, Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2. Love both of those games. And so yeah, going into this movie, I was pretty excited to see a Western on the big screen. I know that this is Chapter 1, and Chapter 2 was supposed to come out in August, and literally just out of having walked out of the theater just now, I unfortunately came across the articles online saying that due to this film bombing in theaters, they're actually delaying the release of the sequel that's already shot, and this film actually ends with teasers for what's to come. And honestly, that kind of breaks my heart, because I'm happy to say I honestly really enjoyed this film. Now, when you go into a movie like this that's called Chapter 1, and Kevin Costner already talked about the fact that this was going to be a broken up story, we had the sequel literally right on the horizon, no pun intended. It really is kind of one of those things where you have to go in with a different perspective on how you review a film, because this is not going to be your traditional film that has a 3-act structure that you can be like, you know, really critiquing this film on its narrative structure in the same way you would another film that's just, you know, comes out and it's a beginning, middle, and end. This is a film that you know is going to not only stay open-ended in the way that a film in a franchise like Marvel will do, where their film has some sort of resolution, but things are still open-ended for what's to come in the franchise. In a film like this, you already know that you're going to get less resolution on most of the story beats, because it's built around the fact that a sequel is coming right around the corner, and it's meant to be a big Western epic. This film's about 3 hours long, and I'll start this off by saying that one of the things that impressed me the most about this is that the runtime flew by. I have to praise Kevin Costner when it comes down to a lot of the technical aspects of the film, and one of those being editing, because honestly, I never found myself bored while watching this film. I found myself engaged consistently at what was going on in the film, and when it comes down to the technical aspects of this film, Westerns are one of those genres that are one of the most pivotal in cinema, and was a huge reason that, you know, cinema continued to grow back in the day. It was one of the most popular genres for a huge chunk of time, and now it's a shame that we're in a place where a film like this is coming out and it's bombing in theaters, and that people don't go to see them as much, which is really a shame. We don't even get them made as much, but they oftentimes are also the kind of films that are some of the most technically challenging to make. A lot of this film is filmed in practical locations, in actual settings, on location, and while there are a couple of sequences you can tell they had to kind of do things on a soundstage, probably for the safety of the actors and other situations, a lot of this is filmed in beautiful scenery, and when you're dealing with nature, you have all kinds of other challenges. But one thing I loved about this film was using natural light for majority of the film. I thought that gave the film such a realistic feel and vibe. It's kind of a shame that that's something that we have to say nowadays, with so many films being so studio lit and kind of taking away that natural feel to the way that movies look. But yeah, when it comes down to the film on a technical aspect, you have so much horse riding going on, you have gunplay going on, you have bow and arrow action going on, there's some blood going on throughout the course of the film as well as tons of fire and actual practical effects that are going on. in real environments. And so you have beautiful cinematography, you have a great Western score that accompanies the film. Again, really solid editing that I thought kept the pacing of the film flowing really well in this 3-hour film that has a lot of storylines that we're following. And on top of that as well, you have great performances that honestly are what make this film really work beyond all of the rest of it. And then you have the set design, the locations used in terms of buildings, the costume design, the accents, everything that was kind of done to make this period piece feel authentic to the 1800s in the Wild West. And the Wild West is one of those interesting time frames to kind of set a story in, because there's so much going on, whether it be, different issues that were going on with the Native Americans at the time and the Western Americans at that time, or things like the classic cops and robbers, or just the various lawless elements that were going on at that time, a lot of the illnesses that were going on at that time. This was a really interesting time in history because it was a time where things were beginning to get more civilized leading into the 1900s and where things have kind of led to today. But it was also in a time where things were kind of crazy and lawless, and there was a lot more violence and death and different things like that going on, while there was also a side of that world that could be peaceful and exciting and fun and filled with love and, family dynamics. But it was easily something that could be disrupted by just the insanity of the world at the time. And so it tends to make for great storytelling, which is why there was such a huge period of time in cinema where it was one of the most prominent genres of all time. And so when it comes down to all the technical aspects here, I think that Kevin Costner and the team did an incredible job of making this film feel like a genuine Western. It definitely felt like it was of its time, and I think everybody who was part of the cast and behind the camera to make this feel like that time did some incredible work on the technical side of things to really make this film be just something beautiful to watch. And watching it on the big screen, I think it's the best way to watch this film. Again, it's been a long time since I've seen a Western on the big screen because we don't get a whole lot of them. And if there have been a few that have come out in the last few years, then I'm kind of ashamed that I've missed out on checking them out. Now, this is a 3-hour film, and so I do have some gripes on some elements, but again, you kind of have to review this film slightly different from my perspective because I knew going in we were going to be getting an incomplete story. And with that, some people might not like that, and so you really kind of have to choose your outlook when it comes to a movie like this. For me, I knew that things were going to be incomplete, but I know the sequel is hopefully not going to come too much longer after this, so I'm hoping if the sequel can really nail certain things down, then you can have a really great, big, epic double feature that we can have here, and if there's more pieces to this film outside of the first two, then you can have way more, and you can have this ginormous, great story. Now, with that said, I think one thing I can say is, having seen the film, there is a portion of this film that feels like it probably would have worked a little bit better like a TV show. Of course, Kevin Costner, of course, is very famous for also being on the TV show Yellowstone, that I've actually not seen, but I've heard incredible things, and I know there's like a spin-off series as well that stars Harrison Ford. And from what I've heard, those shows are incredible. I've heard that they're incredibly detailed as well, and all of the elements that are able to make that feel like a period piece are also done very well. And so Kevin Costner clearly took inspiration from his time doing that show to make this, and probably worked with a lot of similar people, or at least had an eye for what he wanted to do. And so I feel like he had so many storylines that he wanted to follow in this film that on one hand, I actually have to praise how well he balanced it, but on another hand, I think it could have trimmed out a couple of these storylines. While some of them do start to converge, there are a few storylines in this movie that don't really have all that much screen time, that ultimately felt like they were sidelined as we got later into the film. Again, I'm sure they'll become bigger parts of what's to come in the next film, but there were a couple of things that maybe just felt like it was just a little bit too much in this one film. And as I was watching it, I can genuinely say that I was never bored while watching it. And I was quite engaged by all of the various storylines. Every time we got to a different set of characters and followed what was going on there, maybe left those characters for 10 or 15 minutes, came back to them later on, I was always interested to get back to those various stories. And when we would move away from one that I really enjoyed, I was like, oh, damn. But then we'd get to the next story and I'm like, okay, cool. I was interested to see where this one was going to continue to go as well. Some of those start to converge. Some of them have yet to converge and probably won't happen until the sequel. But I think that for the most part, Kevin Costner balanced all of that well. But there were times where, again, I felt like some of that could have been trimmed out. There was probably a few less stories that we needed to follow, because this is a jam-packed movie with a lot of people that we're following. We're following some Westerners who are dealing with, some attacks that are happening with the Native Americans at the time. We have Kevin Costner's character in the mix, who finds himself protecting a young woman and a young child at a certain point in the film. You also are following different people who are surviving some of these attacks from Native Americans, as well as following some Native American characters themselves. You're following another group of characters that are going after Native Americans and actually trying to skin their heads to make a profit. And so there's so much that's going on in this film, tons of different characters that are in different areas that are all doing different different things and dealing with their own challenges. And again, a lot of this starts to converge at certain points in the film, which is where things start to really heat up and become super interesting. But it does become like, man, this will probably have worked a lot better as a TV show. There's just no doubt about it. But after having seen the film, again, I was so impressed by the pacing and the fact that I was never bored and that I was engaged with all these storylines, that despite the fact that a lot of these storylines don't have any resolution and there's so much open-endedness to the story, knowing that the sequel is already filmed and was meant to come out in August and will hopefully come out soon enough gives me a lot of hope, because this is one of those situations where if the sequel sucks and it doesn't really give us what we want out of the storylines we've been following, then it does hurt this first film, right? It will change my overall outlook on it, my rating of it. But if it nails it, and if it's as strong as this film was for me, with a little bit more resolution and brings these stories together and to a resolution by the time you get to the end of that second film, then I think what we could possibly have here is a 5 or 6 hour epic Western film that just really pushes the envelope of big storytelling with tons of characters, which is something we're seeing come back in cinema. But in a world where we have so much cinema and movies these days that feel like they kind of are trying to cater to the audience of people who have short attention spans or just kind of want to get, in and out with laughs and hee hee ho hos throughout the course of the film and just kind of come to an end without it really feeling like this big grand story. It is nice to see Kevin Costner take us back to times where films took their time and they had tons of characters and tons of storylines to follow, and there are plenty of the past that maybe were a little too fat when it came down to their stories and all the characters that were involved, and I do think this film suffers from a little bit of that, but I was also really impressed by how well balanced a lot of it was. Outside of those gripes I've already shared, my only other real gripes is that despite the fact that the film is long and that there is this open-endedness that I'm giving grace to because we do have a sequel on the horizon, it's one of those things where there were a couple of things throughout the course of the film that did feel rushed, which is kind of a shame when you already have a huge runtime and you do have these elements that are kind of being left out for the sequel. So there were a couple of character connections, a couple of relationships between characters that I felt was a little bit rushed, that I didn't really feel were fully earned, which is a shame, again, because you have this long runtime and you at least have the grace of the audience knowing that the story's not complete. So you could have expanded things a little bit more and not rushed some of those elements. But for the most part, I think that it handles it all really well. And so, of course, I'm jumping around it. You're probably wondering, what is this movie really all about? And I would say that to really say what this movie's all about is kind of tough because it follows so many storylines, and I've already shared what a few of those are, and it doesn't really have a singular plot, which might be a bad thing for some, but ultimately, for me, there's so much going on, but it all kind of made sense. And for me, it just felt like the title kind of suggests, it felt like an American saga. It feels like we're just in an American old Western vibe. We got all these different storylines that feel very, Western America, very old Wild West kind of, going on. And they're all kind of converging at different points, and there's obviously set up for what's to come and how they will all come together. But it's like all the different things you want to see in a Western when it comes down to cowboys and sheriffs and, the Native Americans and just the crime and the, cops and robbers element and the romance and the family dynamics. When you got all these different storylines going on in a way where it feels like you got a little bit of everything that you want in a Western film and in a Western story, and they're all kind of converging in this different way. It kind of reminded me in a lot of ways of something like Red Dead Redemption, most notably the sequel, Red Dead Redemption 2, that is incredibly cinematic and just a beautiful story. And in that game, there's so much going on. You got opposing forces that they're fighting against, but there's also love stories in the mix. There's family dynamics, there's fun side stories, and it kind of felt in a lot of ways like something like that, this big over the top, just epic Western film with tons of storylines that gives you a little bit of everything. There's the action, there's the romance, there's the sad element of it, there's just the crime element of it, there's the Native American element of it. I feel like I might be rambling a little bit here, but that's kind of the best way I could describe the film, is it gives you a little bit of everything that you would want from a Western film. And again, it's a shame that the sequel seems to be being pushed off right now because of the fact that this film isn't doing well in theaters. So if you are watching this review and it's maybe been on your mind to check out this movie, or maybe you just kind of dodged it and you're like, I don't know if I want to see a long 3-hour film that's only, part of a story, I honestly would implore you to. I think if you're a big film fan, even if you don't love the narrative by the time you get to the end, and maybe you don't like the fact that things are kind of open-ended by the time you get to the end, I think undoubtedly big film lovers are going to be able to see this on a big screen and really appreciate all the hard work that went into making this movie, because it's undeniable undeniable. If you were a fan of cinematography and the practical locations and beautiful scenery and, you know, just a great musical score that accompanies it, and as well as costume design and set design and horseplay and gunplay and all these different things that you want to see in movies that take like really talented stunt workers and camera operators and all different things to make come to life, I think without a doubt you're gonna be able to watch this film and just be impressed from those technical aspects as well. And then again, just gotta give kudos to the editing here. I was really impressed by the fact that this film felt quicker than even a movie I just saw a couple of days ago, The Bike Riders, which I enjoyed. I gave a positive review here on the channel as well. And that film is like literally a little bit more than an hour less than this film, and I felt like that film felt longer than this film. That's just my general opinion. I'm sure some people will watch this film and it will probably feel long to them, but when I think about other films that have pushed the 3-hour mark in the last couple of years, like the last Martin Scorsese film, that film felt long as fuck. Like, that film felt incredibly long to me, whereas this film didn't, and I really appreciated that as a viewer. So that's gonna be my thoughts on Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1. Looking forward to hearing all of your guys' thoughts down below. Let me know if you liked it. Did you not like it? Are you looking forward to checking this out? Or maybe are you intrigued in checking it out now? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.